Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Alleyne, covering for Darren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you are asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected and join the conversations on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. Let's get started because the Social Justice Forums start now. Welcome back. Independence Care System is a dedicated community of professionals committed to serving individuals with disabilities. At ICS, their primary focus lies in enhancing the health, mobility, and independence of their members, enabling them to actively participate and engage members or as engaged members within their communities. ICS is supporting people with disabilities and chronic conditions in maintaining their health and independence, ensuring they can continue living comfortably at home and thriving within their communities. Joining us is the Health Home Advocacy Specialist and co-chair of the Civics League for Disability Rights, Marcus Johnson, and Senior Vice President of Rehab and Mobility Services, Jean Minkel. I want to thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're welcome.
Now, Jean, can you just give us, for those who are unaware, an overview about your organization, Independence Care System?
Sure. And thank you, particularly in a social justice environment. We're excited to have an opportunity to share our work. We work largely with adults with physical disabilities. Many of our members have a mobility disability, so they're negotiating the world using a wheelchair or a wheeled mobility device. And uh, through our services, largely the coordination of care, as our mission statement says, we want to be sure that people have access to health care that's accessible and understands their disability, that they have access to mobility, meaning they have the right device and the device is in good working condition. And when people are healthy and mobile, they're able to participate and be as independent as they'd like to be and participate in the community. Uh, I'd really ask Marcus to kind of build on that, as he's a person with the lived experience, and I'm a professional in support. But Marcus can really give your audience a much more personal idea of what our work is like and what our successes are.
Right. Well, what Gene is expressing, that's what I really appreciate about Independence Care System because they take the lived experience. So the narrative you truly hear is the narrative of our members that direct our services for our competent disability care. So being a member and also a colleague, I have a unique perspective, and I work with other colleagues at Independence Care System that also have disabilities as well. And our collaboration, working with our competent professional staff, allows us to thrive in the community independently. Independently. So, with Independence Care System's three pillars of health, mobility, and independence, I've been injured this year, makes 32 years, and I've been fortunate enough to take the benefits fully of being an individual with a disability because it was signed into office in 1990. I was injured in 91, and then 88 went into effect in 92. So it's been great to have the benefit of living with a disability and getting direction from great leaders at Independence Care Systems such as Marilyn Saviola, Anna Faye, and it's just made such a difference. And the Civics League for Disability Rights, we're a group of individuals with disabilities, and we fight for legislation that makes it equitable for us to have health care and navigate the healthcare system. It's not easy, but with Independence Care System, they give us that push, that guidance, and we're changing the landscape of how people with disabilities in New York State are living independently.
Now, I really wanted to, something that really stood out to me was the fact when you said that you're not only just a member, but a colleague as well. And I understand that there are three pillars. Could we first just talk about the three pillars of ICS?
Sure. So health is foundational, and yet people with physical disabilities often have barriers to what you and I would consider just routine services. So accessibility in healthcare not only involves physical accessibility. So Marcus referenced our good friend and colleague who unfortunately passed several years ago, but Marilyn Saviola uh, looked for 7 months in 2017 to find an accessible mammography suite for women with a disability, meaning a woman was a wheelchair rider. So something as simple as having ongoing mammography becomes difficult because the wheelchair isn't compatible with the machine that the device is using. And if it was just physical accessibility, that we could work around that. But what our members report to us and what we've experienced when we partner with them is attitudinal accessibility. So when Marilyn went to find the mammography suite, literally a physician met she and her personal assistant in the hallway and said, "You can't come here." She said, "What do you mean I can't come here?" And she goes, "You need to go where people like you go." So just the idea that a self-directing, cognitively intact, capable woman who happens to negotiate the world in a wheelchair was told she couldn't go to a mainstream healthcare facility in New York City. So, and we've seen this over and over again where uh, Marcus referenced disability competent care. So having healthcare providers who are invested in primary care in addition to whatever the mobility or functional limitation is. So there's a big gap in care there. So ICS is working with health and hospitals. We are very tightly connected with our colleagues at Bronx Care, trying to be sure that those of our members who need access, and when I say preventative care, are people getting A1C testing for their diabetes? Are they able to have a colonoscopy? Are they getting immunizations? And what we find is there's an incredible gap in accessibility for that type of preventative health, which then leads to more complications. So health is accessing accessible healthcare with providers who understand the underlying disability. Our second pillar is mobility. And as a physical therapist and the leader within ICS around our mobility services, Marcus can be the first to tell you when his chair doesn't work, it isn't like you and I that maybe our vehicle doesn't work or the bus was late today. It means your legs don't work and you can't get out of bed. So mobility has equally foundational, profound importance. And thanks to our members, ICS over 20 years has put a mobility services program together that not only looks after getting the right pieces of equipment to allow Marcus to negotiate his environment, protect his skin from pressure injury, and provide him the postural support he needs to sit up 7, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, but also to repair that equipment. And thanks to the advocacy of our members have said, you could have the best repair service in the world, but I need a backup chair. Because when I wake up in the morning and my chair doesn't work, I have to be sure that I have an alternate to be able to negotiate my world. So mobility is access to the right device, access to competent and timely repair services, and access to a backup device or a loaner device so that you can keep moving as your repair services are underway. And as I mentioned in the opening, when someone is enjoying good health, has good function, and able to negotiate and be mobile in the world, then they're participatory in their own life. And that leads to a level of independence. And so many of our members are so appreciative that ICS approaches partnership and really talks about people having consumer directed care, that you know what works for you, you know what doesn't work for you. How can we work in partnership to be sure that we're negotiating the systems of care? One of my uh, favorite sayings is our members aren't complex. The systems of care that they need to engage in are very complex. And that's what our staff tries to do, is decrease the complexity of the systems by navigating in partnership with our members so that people can go to work if that's what they want to do, parent if that's what they want to do, engage in volunteer activities if that's what they want to do, engage in social activities the way anybody wants to engage. And if anything, COVID taught all of us, boy, being locked down is really not a great way to live life.
Right.
And if you're disabled, it's like, welcome to our world.
Right.
This is what we've experienced for many years. So we try and break down those access issues so that people have full social ability as well as health and mobility.
Well, Marcus, can you actually just talk about, that independence and what that means for, so many people who are living with disability?
Well, I can say that as an individual with a lived experience, right, and I have a disability, I know the benefit of having ICS in my life, and I also see it through the experiences and relationships I have with my peers with disabilities. So navigating through the world is just that much easier when you're comfortable in the seating position, seating in your chair, and you have confidence when you roll out your door that I'll be fine. I'll be able to make it to my medical appointment, go out with friends, go to school, go to work. And that's what the world needs to understand. People with disabilities are doing the same thing everybody else is doing. And matter of fact, we do it better because our life is so strategic. It's so strategically thought out. It's methodic. Well, we have to make sure if it go here, is it accessible if it goes here? But that also goes that individuals with disability need to be very knowledgeable of how the world does not fit us in, and we have to make them fit us in.
Mm.
The ADA is great; it has a long way to go,
Right.
but the reality of it is, admission, attitudinal barriers, that will always be an issue because people's perceptions are impacting the lives of other people with disabilities. So you need to understand to allow the narrative come from the lived experience if you want to change the landscape of how people with disabilities are living in the communities.
I also want to add something that I learned, which is like pretty amazing. The Americans with Disabilities Act really transformed so much of like the everyday things that everybody pretty much uses and benefits from. And this is from elevators, maybe at the train station, closed captioning on movies. I know when I watch TV, or even like if you're scrolling on TikTok, you'll see that there's closed captioning now, and a lot of that stems from the Americans with Disabilities Act. Can you just talk about that act and how it really impacted, not only the lives of people with disabilities, but just our world, and how if it benefits people without disabilities, I could imagine how much it benefits those who are living with disabilities.
Marcus, start and I'll fill in.
Oh, I could just say what you just brought up is so important because you think about it, closed captioning. Most of the time, we would think about closed captioning when we were watching a foreign film, right? Which I love foreign films, but the reality of it is, closed captioning is just great. It opens the door for everyone or an array of people coping or living life differently. And if you think about it this way, if when disability wins, everybody wins.
Everybody
And
wins.
that's what I love about how the Americans with Disabilities Act, that legislation is making the world notice. And America see that this is a protected class. you need to recognize us because we are not going nowhere.
So I'm really excited that you brought up what we would call universal design. So in meeting the objectives of the ADA, there have been so many benefits for society at large. And I mean, in 1990, I'm not sure they had rolling suitcases. If you travel at all today, everybody has a rolling suitcase. And if you're rolling through the streets of New York, boy, those curb cuts certainly feel like they are universally designed. Every parent in the world who pushes a stroller will tell you, boy, that's really helpful. And having access to ramps where stairs might be right next to it, it's so much easier to push the stroller up the ramp. And yet, and you brought up captioning. I'm right with you as the British mystery fan. Like having the closed captioning makes the viewing experience much easier. And then there's voice input was originally designed as an accommodation for people with disabilities who couldn't access a keyboard. And voice input is now what we all use with Hey Siri or Alexa, do X, Y, or Z. There's the genesis of that technology was really as a reasonable accommodation for people with physical disabilities. But I want to bring up, we talked briefly about healthcare accessibility, and as helpful as the ADA has been, certainly in public building accommodation, in public transportation, there's really been barriers that have not broken down, and healthcare is one of them. You will be shocked how many people will tell you that they had their annual physical while sitting in their wheelchair because the exam table was too high for them to transfer onto, and the facility didn't have a patient lift to help them get onto a proper exam table, just like any able-bodied person would expect to be examined in a supine position. And accountability to meeting the standards of the ADA has been one of its failings, because not one government agency is actually charged with seeing that the requirements of the ADA have been fulfilled. So Marcus said we've come a long way,
Right.
and what has helped come a long way is the disability community holding society accountable. But when, for example, Medicare and Medicaid don't hold a healthcare facility responsible for having accessible equipment, then that's what's adding to the barrier of care. So you can have the legislation, but if you don't have an accountability arm attached to it, you're not going to get the intended outcomes. And
Well,
these are the fights, as Marcus says, that continue every day.
well, I have to end it here because we're out of time, but I truly want to thank you both so much for joining us and
Sure.
educating our community, on what's going on. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for your interest.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Where did the time go? Somehow I lost all those years. Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. Or how did I get here? I can see now.
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are on the rise.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer. In terms of the hate crimes, I think there is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.
Even though we didn't grow up together, he's my favorite brother.
Hey, sis.
I'm the baby of the family, and he's the gentle giant.
What you know about Port Georgia?
Man, please, that's a classic.
You know when they say people are a rare breed? Yeah, he's that.
I'm sorry, I'll be back in a few hours.
Don't worry, Shug. You know I'm for you.
I know.
Go get the football.
That was my favorite memory. He was always for ya. This is a true story of me, Bridget Floyd, and this guy, George Perry Floyd Jr., my big brother.
Welcome back. Tenants and Neighbors is a grassroots membership organization collaborating closely with tenants to empower them in preserving and safeguarding affordable housing throughout New York State. Since its inception, the organization has been highly successful in preserving thousands of units of affordable housing and bolstering tenant rights at the city, state, and federal levels. Joining us is the Executive Director of Tenants Neighbors, Genesis Aquino. Genesis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting.
Now, can you talk about the organization Tenants and Neighbors and its two affiliations?
So, Tenants and Neighbors we are a 501c4 nonprofit organization founded in 1974 for the sole purpose of doing advocacy at the state level to strengthen tenants' rights in Albany. As you may know, New York City has no power over its housing regulations. So it all depends on Albany. So the organization was formed because of that. And then the C3 is the organization in charge of organizing and doing grassroots work to create independent tenant associations in at-risk affordable housing, and also to provide leadership development and technical assistance to tenants who want to organize their buildings. And we are mostly based, in New York City.
Now, I understand that the organization was obviously created many years ago, but can you just talk about, maybe what inspired the creation of it? What was that moment that, people in New York knew that this was something that needed to be around in the city?
Like I said, so we, especially the C3 part of the organization, which is to organize, was founded because there was a big need to protect average affordable housing. So we were formed initially to organize in buildings that are federally subsidized, basically project-based Section 8. A lot of these buildings are being basically converted into market rate, right? Being bought by predatory equity investors. And after they were bought, oftentimes tenants were left without the subsidy, right? For example, if a tenant who live in a project-based Section 8 building is paying $1,000 for the, let's say, two-bedroom apartment, once the building is bought by predatory equity investors, then they'll lose the subsidy, right? So the rent will be $3,000. So it's very likely that the people who live in that neighborhood will be displaced, and the neighborhood will be getting gentrified because of the lack of protection to that type of affordable housing. As the year passed, we started organizing in other type of housing, like rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments, and also federally and state subsidized Michelama co-ops, which were also being lost due to lack of investment from the government.
Now, you mentioned gentrification, and I think it's so important. Now, I know that many of us probably have heard the term before, but for those who aren't as aware, can you just talk about gentrification and how it's actually affecting so many communities in New York?
Yeah, again, gentrification is is really caused by the imbalance between the tenants and the real estate industry that have a lot of power and a lot of money to leverage legislation, unlike most tenants, right, who are mostly poor and working class, low and moderate income people, right, who are maybe unlikely to be connected to resources and have power when it comes to legislation. So um, I lost my train of thought. I went too far, but yeah, gentrification again, the imbalance between the real estate industry and uh, low and moderate income tenants. And it's usually caused because we don't happen to own uh, the housing in which we live, and we have very little control over it. And also, as a collective or as individuals, we don't have power to, for example, to donate $1 million to the governor and have influence over how Albany or the state or the city administration regulates housing. So that causes displacement in our communities. So what we do is organize at the building level, but also form coalition between the tenants who have same landlords and tenants who um, want to organize at the city level and build coalitions so that we can build power to change that and preserve affordability in our communities. Most of the time, people who are being displaced are people of color, black and brown people in particular, and people who happen to be immigrant or have different intersections that are created by this economic system or in systems of oppression uh, that have been built throughout the history of this country. So it is a sad situation, and it's being accelerated each day even more because of the lack of affordable housing being constructed and the lack of protection to preserve the current affordable housing that we have.
Now, can you talk about some of the work you do to educate, some of the communities that you just mentioned, especially those who may speak different languages? I'm sure that can also possibly, be another barrier or another challenge for people who are facing these issues. So, can you just talk about some of the work you do to assist them or at least educate them in this field?
Yeah, most of the tenants that come to Tenants and Neighbors, they come because they are living in deplorable conditions. They're facing harassment, they're facing lack of repairs. Some of them, again, they're about, their building is about to lose their subsidy. So what we do is that we train them and provide leadership development so that they can run their own independent tenant association. So in some cases, that means helping tenants form bylaws, helping tenants run and facilitate their own meetings. Sometimes it means helping tenants incorporate their tenant association so that they can become themselves a non-profit organization and receive funding and collect funding so that they can run their meetings. And oftentimes, that also means training tenants so that they can speak to media and that they can learn how to lobby and advocate for legislation and uh, policy reforms at the city and state and federal level so that they can have power and decide over their lives and determine the future for their communities. So that's the type of leadership development that we do. So providing that, yeah.
Now, I also wanted to expand. I know that oftentimes when we talk about tenants, we're usually talking about rent. And, we're talking about it in like a monetary way. But, I recently had the privilege of going out and learning about so many people's experience where the buildings just weren't even up to standard. So they were paying rent. But let's say, they didn't have clean water, or the building was infested with rats and rodents and stuff like that. Does your organization also help with letting them understand that they have rights to speak out against that?
Exactly. That's the main part of organizing. So we help tenants understand what are their rights. We also connect tenants to legal representations so that they can sue their landlord in housing court and fight for repairs and against harassment, but also provide technical assistance so that they can build power, right? And make collective decision for their communities. But again, most of the people that call tenants and neighbors are people who are facing issues uh, at the individual level, people who are experiencing eviction, people who are living in bad conditions, or people simply who don't know when or how to sign their lease, how much the rent should increase. So yeah, we provide a legal resource for them so that they can be empowered also at the individual level and able to remain in their homes.
Now, I think that's so important, the legal aspect of it. I think a lot of people often think, obviously protesting and making your voice heard is very important, but there is a legal side that can often be intimidating for some people. I guess from your work experience, can you talk about what that process may look like and possibly give advice to people who are currently going through that right now?
Sorry, would you?
Hello? Okay, are you able to hear me now?
I hear you now.
Okay, great. So I'll just repeat the question. So I basically asked, the legal aspect is a very important part of this. I think sometimes people often get very intimidated by this. Is there, do you have any advice for people who are currently going through that? And, what are the steps that they should take in regard to, I guess, beginning that legal process?
I mean, the first thing is seeking assistance, right? Most tenants don't know in what type of apartment or housing they live. So learning in which type of housing you live is the first step, right? If you live in a very stabilized apartment, for example, like almost 2 million New Yorkers, we have a lot of tenant rights, especially right that was strengthened in 2019. If you live in a market rate apartment, it's completely different, right? So learning that first step is crucial to moving forward. And then uh, from there, we can know how what rights you have on that, right? And then seeking, uh, I would say, assistance to get legal representation. In New York City, we have the right to counsel for people who are low income. And you may qualify for legal representation if you are facing eviction. And I would say one of the most important thing, at least for our organizing model in tenants and neighbors, is building coalition with your neighbors. It's very likely that if you are facing, um, let's say, a repair issue, very likely your neighbors also experiencing the same thing. So talking to your neighbors is important because there is power in numbers, and you are likely to win a case when you have evidence that other people in the building are facing the same issue.
Now, I know that you mentioned something happened in 2019. I'm not sure if this is the exact same thing that I'm thinking of, but I understand that on June 14th, 2019, the Upstate Downstate Housing Alliance sparked changes to New York State rent regulation system in the past 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about that happening?
Yeah, so Tenants and Neighbors is a leading member of the Downstate Upstate Alliance. We formed that alliance so that we can build strength uh, in the state, right? And in 2019, we basically had the strongest victory for tenants in over 20 years for the state of New York. So we strengthened the rent regulation laws that impact people who live in rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments, but also implemented or strengthened some of the rights for people who are market rate based unregulated tenants. Um, for example, one of the changes that happened in 2019 was shortening the time for MCIs, major capital improvement. In the past, if your landlord had a major capital improvement in the building, for example, they got a new boiler, they were able to charge the tenant for the rest of their tenancy for that boiler per room. After 2019, that was limited to 30 years. Still a long time, We wanted to eliminate it completely, but that's what happened. Another thing that happened in 2019 is that we got rid of the vacancy decontrol, right? If you move into a new apartment, there were loopholes in the law that allow the landlord to destabilize the apartment, but that's not possible no more. And landlords can no longer charge 20% or 18% to the new tenant that comes into to a rent stabilized apartment. So there's a lot of loopholes that were closed that makes it hard for predatory landlords to displace people and harass tenants and hike the rents. So it was a major victory, you know. Unfortunately, a lot of tenants don't know that they have those rights. So some of the work that we are doing as a coalition for the whole state is continuing to educate people about what rights they have or not, because that's the main um, point to preventing displacement in our communities.
Now, can you talk about the four leadership committees? And I understand that some of them consist of like rent stabilization, rent control, but can you talk about them a little bit more?
Yeah, so tenants and neighbors believe in uh, we believe that the best method to fighting gentrification and displacement is by building a movement of grassroots tenant leaders who are educated and empowered. So after we organize at the building level, where we form tenant association, we engage deeply. We continue to engage deeply in leadership development. So we work closely with our leaders, and we engage in committee work. So if tenant leaders live in a rent stabilized building, we work together um, to basically have an influence over the campaigns and the legislative reforms that we work on at the city and the state level. Same thing with the HUD Leadership Committee. Most of those are people who live in project-based Section A, federally subsidized building, and we have to do advocacy at the federal level. Um, so it's basically that empowering tenants to take control over their lives and their communities beyond the work that they do at the building level, but also to be ambassadors of the tenant movement, right? As an executive director, I am just one voice, but we believe that people who are directly impacted have uh, the solutions to the problem. So tenants are the solution to the housing crisis and the eviction crisis that we are facing right now.
Well, we have about a minute left. Can you just quickly let me know, like, what are your hopes for the future in regard to so much of the work that you do to support many New Yorkers?
What is the future of the work we do to support New Yorkers?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, one of the things that we're looking forward to is reforming the Rent Guideline Board. Our members are very excited to work on that. Right now, the board is completely chosen by the mayor of the city of New York, and our tenant leaders believe that the board should be more democratic. The city council should have a say on that. And there should be more tenant representatives sitting on the table. Right now, there's only two tenant representatives, five public members who also happen to be on the side of landlords. And it has been like that for a long time. Even though the Rent Guideline Board was formed to create fair adjustment to the rents, it has not worked that way, right? For the past, I don't know, 40 years, it has increased the rent, with the exception of the de Blasio administration that froze, the rent a few times. But it has not been that way throughout its history. So that's something that we are excited about. In the last year, we were fighting hard for good cost eviction. Good cost eviction is a bill to ensure that people who live in unregulated apartment also have uh, the right to remain in their homes and fight rent hikes. Right now, if you live in let's say a 2-3 family home, um, or a small building with less than 4 apartments, who is not a building that is not regulated, the landlord can decide to evict you whenever they want.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we believe is not fair, and we work really hard for the governor to sign this bill. So we look forward working on that in the future. There's a lot of other legislation, like the Housing Assets Voucher Program. It's a program that kind of mirrors the Session
I'm so
8 program.
sorry. We're running out of time, but I truly appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about this. And hopefully, maybe we can come back again and talk further about this. But thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Most hiring algorithms would scream me out.
Some bosses couldn't see me as a leader.
I've run this place for 20 years, but I still need to prove that I'm more than what you see on paper.
I've been running code as long as I've been able to reach a keyboard.
This is what I do. It's second nature for me, coordinating 100 details at once.
It's the way my mind works. I have a very mechanical brain.
I sold them on my skills.
You gotta be so good they can't ignore you.
My magic is
analytics and empathy. That's how I'm getting clients. You have to have the confidence in yourself to show up and defy the odds.
I am more than who I am on paper.
I never got a college degree. And today, I'm the CEO of my own company. People want to tell me I'm one in a million, when actually I'm one of millions. Stars are all around us. It's time for them to shine.
Thank you so much.
Fostering a pet for a friend or neighbor can keep families together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
One of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history at Post nightclub in Orlando.
Walking into the building for the first time after the shooting, it was crippling, but it had to be preserved. If you're an ally of this community, speak out. There are more of us together than apart. It is the power of love in its rawest form.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
Bro, you gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's a white people thing.
Escúchame, en esta casa los hombres no lloran.
You all right?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
Thanks for hearing me out, bro. Appreciate it.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Welcome back. Recently, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul proposed a program targeted at specific benefits and housing obligations similar to the former 421A program for development proposals in the Gowanus neighborhood of Brooklyn. This alternative aims to assist projects that missed out on the property tax break provided by 421A. It's part of a series of initiatives announced by the governor to support increased housing construction following the legislature's rejection of her broader January proposal. Joining us now is the CEO of MNS, Andrew Barrocas. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
All right, thanks so much for having me.
So can you first just let everybody know a little bit more about MNS?
Sure. So we're a new development marketing firm that specializes in ground-up construction rentals. We handle the leasing, marketing, advertising. We get involved in the pre-development planning of a lot of buildings throughout Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. And we've been involved with over 500 new construction rental buildings throughout the city.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about Governor Hochul's alternative proposal for projects that missed out on the 421A property tax break in Gowanus?
Yeah, so it gives an advantage to developers. These are large-scale developments that are happening in this area, and generally it's taking about 3 years for these projects to be completed. And the biggest issue was the deadline of completing these projects in order to be eligible for the 421A tax abatement was the end of 2026. So it really prohibited developers in getting banks comfortable with financing these projects, and it would have really halted a lot of development there that would have, been a huge, disadvantage to the growth of the neighborhood, providing more housing, both market and affordable housing.
Now, why was Gowanus chosen as the area to test this alternative to the 421A program?
So it was an area that had a high concentration of new development, large-scale development that are really, those were the ones that were, really, those are the projects that were the largest scale, I would say. So they were, they were really that deadline really created, made it challenging for them to get financing and really get going. So, this is an area that really will benefit from the development, not only in this area, but all the surrounding neighborhoods. So, I'm happy to see that this was an area that was chosen. There's obviously a lot of other areas that have high concentrations of development that would also benefit from this program. So I'm happy to see that it was chosen. We're working on several projects in the area, and I think it's instrumental to the continued growth of the neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods.
Now, how many housing units are estimated to be in jeopardy without a tax break in Gowanus, and what impact could this alternative have on the situation?
Yeah, so this impacted thousands of units, on both affordable and free market units in this immediate area. So they'll definitely have a benefit on several projects in the area that, wouldn't have been able to be built without it. So, time will tell how many, will be able to take advantage of it, because it still is limited to projects that had their footings in the ground and had started construction before the end of the expiration of the old 421A. So there are still limitations. There are definitely projects that will not be built because of no 421A. So it doesn't help every single project in the area, but it definitely will be an advantage to some of them.
Now, how does this new program address concerns raised by construction unions regarding labor standards and wages?
Yeah, so they basically want similar similar program to what they had in the current 421A and protection with wages. And something that they obviously are pushing for is increasing wages. So, they just want to make sure that they're protected the same way that they were with, 421A.
What are the potential challenges developers might face if they opt for the new program instead of the 421A tax break?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess the biggest hurdle that they're going to experience is time, and that's really what kills a lot of these development projects is time. And I would say that this program, although it's an advantage to those programs that wouldn't have been able to be built without it, they will take about a year before construction starts in these projects. So that's really the biggest downside of it is time. And I would say that you won't see one of these projects, continue in development for another year or so.
Now, I kind of want to expand on the idea of the challenges that developers may face. I know that just walking around New York City, there's so many new buildings and new areas that are coming around. Can you just talk about the challenges that just come with being in that field? And I understand that there's a high need for new buildings in New York City. So what are some just overall challenges just in general in this field?
Yeah, so up until the expiration of 421A, it was really encouraged for development in New York City, and we had an as of right, area that could be developed, and it was definitely pro-development in a lot of ways. We've been involved with 500 new construction rental projects, and one thing that they all had in common was that they all had a 421A tax abatement. So there's really no way of building new construction rental housing without some sort of abatement. So it's it's definitely needed in order to continue the growth and meet the demand. And it's unfortunate that we'll have a period of time where new rental housing will not be developed, call it 2026 to however long it goes without having some sort of abatement. But at that period of time, just based on simple, supply and demand, it's going to create a shortage of rental housing, and it's going to create a spike in rental pricing. And in addition to that, it's not going to help, with creating more affordable housing, because this 421A program is really the biggest driver of creating affordable housing. And, if we want to create more of it, which I'm, a big fan of, and I know we need it, we need to work together and have programs that, make it an advantage to build them. Obviously, right now, it just doesn't work. And it doesn't help having articles that come out in the New York Times saying that this 421A program, uses $1.7 billion of our budget, and doesn't talk about, the advantage that it brings $2.5 billion, to the city. So although, there's a big number being spent, there's a lot more being made from it. So it's unfortunate that, the news could portray these things and push them one way or another. But at the end of the day, I can tell you, from doing this 20 years and 500 projects, that, every one of them have that same one thing in common, which is this tax abatement. So we need it. It's great for the city. These tax abatements expire. These buildings are paying full taxes. So it's definitely a benefit to the city and, to the renters as a whole.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that for the average New Yorker, and maybe who's working in a different field, or someone who just lives in New York City, we don't get to, I guess, hear from people like you and the work that you do. So I could totally understand why someone may view it and have a certain opinion. But I think that's why conversations like these are really important, so we can hear from people like you and the work that goes into, as you mentioned, something that has a very high demand. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Obviously, it trickles down, and not having this abatement is detrimental to everybody, from the person who stops the truck to deliver appliances, to all that chain reaction of people involved in the development project. And there's a ton of people that will be out of work because, we don't have this abatement. So it's a lot bigger than people think. And, that's one of the issues that I have, is that, you can't, it can't be one or the other. It's got to work for everyone. Mm-hmm. And, I think that there were flaws with Affordable New York, the old 421A plan, but instead of getting rid of it in entirety, maybe come up with different ways that it could be more beneficial. For instance, one of the issues is that a lot of people think that the 130 AMI level is not really affordable, and it doesn't really benefit enough people in New York City. I would say that it does benefit a lot of people in New York City. That's not necessarily where we have our biggest issue. We have our biggest issue in the lower AMI levels. And the reason why developers chose the higher AMI level is because, that was what made more financial sense from a business standpoint. So all developers chose that. Now they've been, portrayed as like the bad person, the bad group in the equation, when they just chose that because that was part of the plan that they could choose. Now the city just needs to change it. They need to make that part of the plan to have 130 AMI, maybe less tax less tax, advantageous. So there are ways to offset it, without getting rid of it in entirety. So, I think just kind of working through these things and talking, about them, a lot of times, decisions are made and they just don't kind of walk through all the different scenarios. It's, you could take the hotel industry, 2 years ago, they decided to change that all hotels built in New York City needed to be union. And in the last 2 years, 0 new hotels have been built. And the reason is because it doesn't make financial sense to do it. So there are none being built, there are none being financed. So it's not even like you could have a developer who says, okay, I want to try this. The banks won't even finance it to allow you to try it. So you really need to walk through all these things. Meanwhile, there's a lot of people that are in the industry of building hotels that are now being impacted in New York because they made this decision. So, I just don't like making decisions that aren't kind of thought out, and all the repercussions of them, because at the end of the day, them, getting rid of 421A is going to lose the city money. It's going to, it's going to increase the price of fair market apartments. It's going to decrease the amount of affordable units, and it's going to eliminate a ton of jobs that are created from these large-scale developments that are built. It's not just the people on site, it's all the people that are supplying materials and other trades to these projects. So, this is definitely a very big issue. And, I think what Hochul's currently doing is at least somewhat of forward thinking and coming up with a solution, although it doesn't work for every project and it doesn't work for every developer, it could work for certain developers. So I think it is forward thinking, and we need more of this in order to overcome what we're currently dealing with, which is not having anything.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation and, shedding some light on some things that I personally didn't really know much about before. So once again, I just truly appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was nice speaking with you.
We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the Recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm Kibin. Take care.